My question to you all is what facts have you heard or read regarding the environmental or social impacts of the fashion industry? For instance, perhaps you've heard that the production and use of clothing creates more greenhouse gases than flights and shipping combined. Perhaps you've heard that nearly 3/5 of all clothing ends up in incinerators or landfills within years of being made. But generally, when you hear these facts, right, the question becomes, is this stuff based on credible data and scientific analysis? And why does it matter for all our work and all our interest in sustainability? Welcome to Big Closet, Small Planet, made possible by the Laudes Foundation, the Relander Foundation, and Tencel. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Ecotextile News. And today, this special episode is also hosted in collaboration with Stockholm Fashion Week. And I'm Mike Schrager. So we're going to continue with this special segment called Fact or Fiction, where we explore basically commonly repeated factoids in order to determine whether they're substantial, whether they're helpful. And just as a reminder, from my point of view, a factoid is information that is reported and repeated so often that it becomes accepted as fact, right? So that's what I'm using to define a factoid. And in our last fact or fiction discussion, we had Sandra with us, which we discussed this issue of climate impact. Is it greater than flights and shipping combined? And you can refer back to that to listen. And we're going to address that more generally here. But today I wanted to broaden our focus. I wanted to address other cited factoids. And more importantly, I wanted to use these as a basis to talk about whether fashion has what Alden here, who's our guest, thinks has a misinformation problem in regards to sustainability. I was actually inspired by an excellent and timely article written by Alden Wicker, who's a journalist and wrote an article for Vox on this topic. The title of the article, I hope I get this right, is Fashion Has a Misinformation Problem, and That's Bad for the Environment. And then there was a subtitle, which was equally important, which was Questionable Facts Plague the Conversation Around Sustainability and Fashion, and that makes the industry harder to regulate. Alden, did I get that right?
Yeah, perfect.
Oh, right.
That's exactly it.
So we're so lucky, as you hear, we have Alden with us. Alden Wicker joining us from the U.S. to discuss her views on the topic. Additionally, we have Sandra Roos, an expert in the environmental impact of textiles, who joined us previously. And I want to welcome both of you. That was a long introduction. I apologize, but you got to set the scene. Alden, can you please tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself, your background in fashion journalism and sustainability?
Sure. So I've been writing about the topic of sustainable fashion for 7 years. I am a freelance journalist, so I've written for Vox and a variety of other publications, as well as I founded ecocult.com in 2013, a couple weeks before the Rana Plaza factory collapsed in Bangladesh. And since then, I have become sort of an expert on sustainable fashion as well as a journalist. So, and EcoCult has grown to be one of the biggest information sharing platforms in the world for designers and consumers and fashion professionals around this topic.
Okay. And Sandra, hello.
Yes.
What is your expertise?
Yes. Today, actually, it's my third day at the Swedish fashion brand Kappahl. So that's where I work now as head of sustainability. But my background is that I've been a researcher on the topic of sustainable fashion for many years. And I have a PhD on the topic of life cycle assessment of textiles. And I have been working for a lot of time trying to find relevant data on the environmental performance of fashion and also trying to see how we can secure that the options for improvement are actually efficient. So now I'm heading off to improving things in reality at the brand that's dedicated. So I feel very excited. So
you spent 10 years on the analysis phase and advising, and now you're going to use that in practice at a major brand.
Yes, exactly.
Good. So I want to start with Alden. So at the beginning of this year, we referred to this. You wrote this article arguing that fashion has this misinformation problem. So why did you decide to write this article?
Yeah, so I actually wrote the article breaking or debunking the fact around fashion being the second most polluting industry in the world. And then it continued to circulate after that. And until the New York Times also did a debunking, and it's sort of gone away, not completely. And then I went back to the same editor at the beginning of this year, and I told her that, people weren't really using this fact anymore. They had just slotted in more similar facts that were similarly unsubstantiated. And so I wanted to do an article on all of them. And so I did. I got as much as I could into the article. Eventually she said it was too long and I had to make some choices. So there's even more out there to debunk.
And what did you find out? Because the article I do recommend, and we'll refer to that. What did you find out by doing this research and writing this?
Yeah, so there's like a few main ones that came up in there. You mentioned some of them. The one that bothers me the most right now and is used the most is fashion. The fashion industry is responsible for 20% of global waste or water pollution or wastewater. And so if you trace that back, it was first stated in a research paper, but from a publication that no one's ever really heard of. And in that research paper, it didn't say we did this research and found this. It said, according to the, who was it according to? The World Bank. And so Eco Textile News reached out to the World Bank and they said, this fact isn't ours. And Eco Textile News did a lot of great work on this, and I mentioned it in the article, but it still continues to be cited. But now it's cited as, according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, according to the UN. There's now an article in Nature that says, so people now say, according to Nature, an article in Nature by some research, like design researchers in the United States. So it's still out there, and I actually refuse to share any article about sustainable fashion that leads with this fact because I don't want to propagate it.
Okay, and so you started with that,
yeah.
And how did it evolve to a broader article about this issue?
Yeah, so the question is like, why do these variety of facts keep on getting circulated? And it came down to the fact that there just aren't enough, especially in the United States. It's a little bit different in Northern Europe, but there's just not public funding for research to figure out what these numbers actually are. So a lot of people come to me and they say, okay, I really liked your article. So what is it? And I say, I have no idea. I cannot find the information. I do not know. There's anybody who wants to study this topic, they might go into industrial ecology, or they might try to go into textile research. But most textile researchers or students in the United States only learn how to create textiles. And then they get absorbed into large brands, and their research never makes it out into the world because it's proprietary, or any research that does come out is just geared towards getting consumers to buy more stuff. So we have a huge dearth of research in the United States. And any research that is out there, journalists aren't really finding it. But I don't think it's out there.
So let's come back to that, because you noticed this one particular fact that was being repeated, a factoid. I got to be careful, that has been repeated again and again. And it sort of alerted you to perhaps a greater problem, is my understanding, that somehow you were reading that there were other factoids being used, being banted around. Is that what then stimulated you to think more broadly about this?
Yeah. And, some of the other facts that are out there, you mentioned, 3/5 of all fashion created it used to say burned within a year, and then it said burned within years, and this is from McKinsey, and it's so weird because like burned within years, like what does that mean? How many years? Like 20 years? 3 years. I don't know. And the problem with a lot of the research coming out of McKinsey is sort of the first of all, it's all again proprietary and private, right? They buy it, they package it, and then they use it to put out their reports. And so we don't actually know where this data is coming from. We can't verify it. And then also they sort of mix it in with a lot of these other facts that aren't true. So I just tend not to trust the reports that are coming out of this like for-profit consulting firm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me turn to Sandra, who actually has worked for the last 10 years on the actual analyse. I'm trying to do the
analysis.
English version. Analysis. I've lived in Sweden too long. So the analysis that you see, do you recognize what Alden is saying? Is this something that you've come across?
You mean that there's a lot of factoids out there?
There's a lot of factoids and it's not clear where the sources are.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
And from my point of view, I think it's very disturbing. Both that UN and other authorities keep spreading these myths, because they are, if they are cited like a fact coming from UN, you think it has a credibility in it. But when Alden and other journalists have actually publicized the proof that they are wrong, that will decrease the credibility of these institutions. And that's really a problem, because where should people turn to? Where should non-experts get this information? So for the industry, for policymakers, for consumers, it makes it more difficult to make the right choices. And in this time, we really need to make the right choices because we are in a hurry. So I think it's really a problem that UN, who should be contributing to a better, sustainable world, is instead spreading myths instead of creating new knowledge.
Okay, and let me just clarify, because of course the UN has parts of the UN have been promoting certain information, but you've mentioned a range of different sources, right? From consulting companies to
Swedish ministers
to journalists, right? Journalists. So there's a lot of people.
And the new French minister of sustainable fashion also repeated some of these myths.
Okay. And let me also, wow, we have a lot of people we need to get to. And how much, because I think in English, myth means, sort of something that's definitely not true, right? Doesn't it, Alden? So maybe we need to distinguish between what is not based on robust analysis, where we can say this is true, scientifically rigorous, proved, versus what may or may not be true. And do you think we should make a distinction between that? Because some of these things are maybe things where one research report has indicated that there could be a problem, but with the scientific process, you need a lot more substantiated research to prove that. So in general, we should be talking about how much of this is interesting but not fully robustly proven, and how much is actually disproven. Does that make any sense? Should we be categorizing
absolutely.
it that way?
Yeah, I would categorize these in a couple different categories. So there's the ones that were completely plucked out of thin air, like the 20% of global water pollution or second most polluting industry. And then there's ones that are sort of based on back of the napkin math by people like myself who are not researchers. And then there's, so that I would put in that category that fashion is responsible for more emissions than aviation and shipping combined. And I actually think that might have come from me, because I did some back of the napkin math in a blog post for EcoCult.
Right.
And I do my best, but like, I'm not like New York Times, right? I don't have a bunch of fact checkers, and I didn't like, I ask Linda Greer all the time, and usually her answer is, I don't know.
Right.
I agree, but I don't know. And So I did some back of the napkin math based on like some old numbers around aviation and shipping. And I was like, I think it's higher than these two things, but I'm not entirely sure. And then I start seeing this percolating. And so,
across the whole world.
Yeah. And then there's the third category, which is privately funded proprietary research that results in reports that make grand claims, but that are not peer reviewed and don't share any of the data that led to that conclusion. And so then it's like sort of like a banner fact, but like it's not actually useful because if we can't dig into the data, we don't know what to do with that fact, right? So is fashion responsible for 8% of global carbon emissions? Okay, if that's true, like where are those carbon emissions coming from? So we can start being really precise about like how we're changing the system, but like we don't actually know.
And so let's go through, we don't have to belabor it, but so that the audience again hears some of these factoids, and you've tried to categorize them, and I'm not expecting you to do it again, but what are some of them that, if you could just list them, the ones that you've come across?
60 million garment workers are employed in the global fashion industry, and 80% of them are women. So that is part completely pulled out of nowhere and part based on outdated data from Bangladesh. That's no longer true in Bangladesh. It's probably more like 55% from what I've heard from people who've done work there. And if you look at Primark's excellent factory by factory data, so they list all of their factories by country, and you can look through all of them. And I didn't do the data analysis because I couldn't pull it into a sheet, but it looks like it ranges from 90% in like Myanmar down to less than half in India. So I don't think anyone's actually figured out what that is, but it's definitely not 80%. I would say it's probably around 60% if I had to make a guess.
Okay. List another one.
Yeah. Between 80 billion and 150 billion garments are produced a year globally. This, one of those comes from McKinsey. One of those comes from, I'm not really sure where, but that is a huge, huge range of garments being produced.
Okay. Anything else? Any other ones that you sort of see often?
I think that's it. I'm sure there's more. I think there was one of the ones that actually I think is pretty accurate is the amount of waste, or like the amount of waste that fashion is responsible for. It's supposed to be around 4%, and that I traced back to a fairly robust report by our WRAP rep in the United States, in the UK, which is they sort of showed their work. Again, I'm not a researcher. I can't peer review things, but it looked pretty good.
Okay. And Sandra, you also have we've talked about previously, you've had some frustrations.
Yeah, we talked about this maritime shipping.
Right.
Stuff
and the way
in the previous pod.
That's right. So what are some other ones? Because that's the one I asked you about the first time. But it sounds like you're a little irritated that there's a bunch more.
Yeah. But what I'd like to bring up is the issue on microplastics.
Yeah.
Where it's spread that soon there'll be more microplastics in the ocean than fish. And as you said, Alden, maybe it's just, someone who's changed plastic into microplastic or whatever. But this is definitely not true. And what is true is that in the Baltic Sea, outside Sweden, between Russia, Finland, Poland, and the Baltic Sea, we've had environmental monitoring for decades, which means they take samples of fish and water. So we can go back and get the samples from 1985, and people have done this up to 2015, so 30 years. And then they looked how much microplastic particles do we have in the water and in the fish, in the digestive tracts. And it has not increased. So when people say that there will be more and more microplastics out there in the ocean, data shows that at least this has not happened the last 30 years in the Baltic Sea. And I think people should know that, because I think people get scared that we are getting more and more microplastics out there. Maybe we are drinking water with microplastics in it. And I think it's very sad that people actually think that we are getting more and more microplastics in the water. But I also would like to add, that when they talked about when they checked the microplastic particles, it turned out that only 8% of them were synthetic.
Okay, so explain that.
Yeah, so a recent study, they actually looked on the microfibers that were caught in the ocean, and they were cellulosics. That is cotton right. Or forest fibers, but they were not synthetic. So 80% cotton, 12% animal fibers, animal hair, and only 8% of it were synthetics. So this means that the calculations on how much microplastics we have out there are very wrong.
Okay, let's keep going.
Another one is that we should avoid synthetic fibers, avoid polyester garments to save the environment. It's connected to, of course, the microplastic issue. But the thing is that synthetics or plastic materials, they are not the problem as they are. So plastics is not toxic. It's the chemicals in the plastic that are toxic.
Okay.
And the thing is, when you treat garments, when you dye and finish the garments, it doesn't matter if it's cotton or if it's animal fiber or if it's synthetic, you still add chemicals. So the problem isn't what type of fiber we have, but that we sometimes add harmful chemicals to them.
But some people would ask or assume, unrelated to microplastics, that it's an oil-based product, right? Polyester.
That it's
oil-based.
Oil-based, yes,
right.
Definitely.
So isn't that the reason people say we need to stay away from it, or in the end that doesn't mean much in the
true. That's another reason that anything that's oil-based is worse than anything that would be natural-based. And this is really an annoying myth, I think.
Okay.
That fiber choice is the most important, because when we look at what causes the climate change, like IPCC, what really does cause the climate change, it's the fossil fuel.
Right.
So it's not material, but it's the fuel, the energy that we cannot see or touch. So we don't see it, we don't notice it. But so it doesn't matter if you have polyester or cotton or viscose. It matters what type of fuel and how much fuel you use in the production.
So that's a big one. I don't know, Alden, does that surprise you? I mean, the issue that there's always so much talk about fiber choice, but not fiber processing.
Yeah. This is something actually that has come up. I've been working on a story that hopefully will someday come out about like how toxic fashion is when it gets to us, especially in America or developing countries, which American is increasingly becoming a developing country. But I digress. I talk to a lot of people who have multiple chemical sensitivity. So these are people who are exquisitely attuned to toxins in their environment, smells, detergents, perfumes, and their clothing. And so when I talk to them, I ask them what they do to avoid having a reaction to their clothing. They describe a variety of things they do, leaving their stuff out in the backyard for 3 months to off gas. But they also say, I avoid synthetic garments. And I gently tell them that it doesn't matter what material the garment is made of. It matters how it's processed, because one of the things that I debunked on EcoCult was this thing that someone sent me that a wellness yoga influencer was saying, like, don't buy recycled polyester or athletic wear or yoga pants made out of recycled bottles, because it will mess with your hormones and your endocrine system. And so I looked into it, and I asked actually Martin Mulvihill from Safer Made, and he explained to me, and I had to, like, it's very hard to explain, but essentially it's like the fibers, the PET doesn't have the chemicals in it. Those are just added to water bottles, and they're not even released until this plastic in the water bottle gets heated up to really, really high temperatures. Like, you would die if you were wearing yoga pants that got hot enough to release any BPAs or phthalates that are in them. Right. So it's not actually a thing. Now, I will say that personally, I prefer natural fibers because they don't pick up smell as much as synthetics, and I think they're more comfortable. And so performance-wise, I prefer natural fibers. However, it's not my health that concerns me in why I choose them.
Okay. So I have so many questions, and we don't want to take too much time, but this is, if I'm a listener, I'm thinking, well, I know that these two experts, one a journalist who does investigative reporting, and one someone who's an expert in environmental impacts, is telling me there are a lot of misinformation or unsubstantiated information out there. So I want to move on to why do you think this has become such a problem? Why, from a journalist perspective and all this news, why is it that we've gotten to this spot? And Alden, I think you mentioned something about this earlier, but maybe you can elaborate on it.
Yeah, so I did mention that there's just not enough funding for publicly available high quality research. And then also a lot of PhDs, professors and researchers who are focused on the topic of sustainable fashion actually come from the design world. They were designers, or they're teaching design students at FIT how to create a collection. And that's incredibly important. And I'm so happy that they're so focused on this, but they're not industrial ecologists. So when they do try to put a report in Nature, they end up putting in a lot of misinformation. And it's incredibly frustrating me. And again, I think they're wonderful humans, and I hate to call them out, but I've done multiple interviews with some of the leading researchers and advocates in this area, and I say, what information can you give me? And they just repeat these same things to me again. So it's that's another really frustrating thing. But the University of California used to have a sustainable, an environmental textiles program, and they got rid of it, as I say in my article. And so if you are interested in this topic, you can only sort of go into learning how to create innovative new textiles, and then hope that maybe you can apply your passion to this topic. But there's not really a lot out there for people to do.
So there's not a lot of robust research centers that are independent and such. And then what about, I'm thinking more from a fashion journalist perspective. Do fashion journalists educate themselves in this way? I can't imagine it's part of the education, but I may be wrong.
No, it's not. And there's a lot of fashion journalists, again, who are very interested in this topic, and good on them. But, they came up in a world where, all you're doing is saying, I went to this fashion show and it was very nice looking, versus, this brand has released some carbon footprinting. And so they treat it the same, which is copy paste press release, a little bit of critique, and here you go. Okay. And nobody's really critiquing some of these capsule collections and completely voluntary standards and agreements and all of these things that are going on.
Okay, so it's not necessarily inbuilt in the journalism education in fashion. And I'm thinking, Sandra, do you sort of feel similarly from a research perspective? Is there not enough proper research programs in textiles and sustainability? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I also think that this is a very under-researched topic. And from my perspective, what I can see as a researcher is that we are very few people who are working with this. So we sort of all know each other. And this is a bit scary, I think, that there are so few of us. But also, I know that researchers, they don't have access to communication skilled people. So there's a really big problem with reaching out. And I was part of the Swedish program Mr. Future Fashion. And that was the first research program that had a full-time educated communication person dedicated to communicating the results. And that was actually a real success. That was the first time that the research that we made had success with the outreach, so that we actually could reach the right people. And to get this broader spread to a wider audience than just other researchers, we really need to collaborate, and we need to find each other. And I don't know really how to do that, but maybe Alden has some thoughts.
Yeah, maybe this is a great way to figure out how do we go from here, because we have this challenge that there's a particular industry, and I can imagine this is probably similar in lots of industries, right? That we need industry-specific, independent, credible, robust research to be able to base decisions on. And from my own perspective, the way they're generally funded is through commercial enterprise saying they're going to put some money into an industry initiative like the microplastics initiative or whatever, because they see that they're at risk of being questioned about their product. But that then channels that kind of research in a particular way with a particular agenda. There are other agendas, right? Nonprofits have their own agendas that sometimes are robust and fair and sometimes not. Yeah. So, who's going to pay for this? How important is the textile industry globally, and who would pay for independent, robust research? How do we get there?
I think also we're suffering from a real bias against the fashion industry. I think that I see this in journalism. Publications that take themselves very seriously in terms of science and journalism are just not interested in making the foray into fashion because it's seen as lightweight. And I think it's the same also for research institutions, right? I think there's a little bit of sexism in there, like, oh, you ladies with all of your shoes, this is so silly. And then I think it creates this feedback loop of we keep spouting misinformation. People who consider themselves serious don't take us seriously, and therefore it just creates this little feedback loop in a bubble of everyone saying the same things to each other, and never being able to break out of that and speak to the wider community of people who might be able to help us figure this out.
Mm-hmm. Clothing, fashion that we all need on the planet, sustainable. It's met with some sort of I don't know the English word for it, but
derision.
Yeah. Yes.
Derision. So if you were to pick one thing we need to do to combat this problem that you're arguing exists, what would one thing be? How do we take this forward?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, I think there's a few things that need to happen. I think that it's hard, but I think that when researchers see misinformation, a lot of times it will be met with defensiveness, but I think it's important to reach out to the journalists and just say like, hey, I saw your article. I have additional information for you that, could help your reporting in the future. Like, here's some resources, and then, I'm always happy to get on the phone. That's something that could really, really help. Because one time I sent an article to ICAC, they do research on the global cotton industry. And you could just hear the guy sighing in his email, like, I don't expect you to even care. But there is some serious errors in your article. So if you feel like getting on the phone, and I was like, of course I want to get on the phone. Like, tell me where I'm wrong. And he ended up correcting the idea that there's like 3,700 gallons of water that goes into the average pound of cotton, or a liter of cotton.
Yes.
So that's always really, really helpful. And I think the other thing is that, I don't know how to get more money into this research area. I would like to see very large corporations like H&M and stuff not just fund labs, but fund research at like nonpartisan research, like create the H&M Institute of Sustainable Fashion at UCLA. That would be amazing. Hopefully they would keep their hands off the research, but like all the research is inside right now, and that's no good.
Very interesting. What about you, Sandra? Any steps forward?
No, I'm still longing for this evaluation method where we can actually have a united way of measuring ourselves and find out where we are, what's the status, and then with facts evaluate how much improvement will we make with different solutions.
Right.
Will we improve the environmental performance if we switch from polyester to a new sustainable fiber or something? Right. I mean, how much impact will it actually have? So,
and when you say that, sorry to interrupt, but when you say that, we do have those kinds of reports. They've come out in the last bunch of years, but I think what I'm hearing you say is they're not necessarily robust scientifically.
No, I mean, there has come a publication from Sweden, for example, the Swedish EPA, but the other publications are the ones that Alden are talking about.
Right. No, but I'm thinking of, there's all sorts of global NGOs who are producing reports in collaboration with Boston Consulting or McKinsey or such, and they do come out with their analysis and their rections on things, and more will come.
Exactly.
So I think it's very hard.
The factoids, I would say.
Yeah. I wish I got paid as much as a McKinsey consultant to put out these reports, because I feel like I would do a better job. And I have a friend who's a McKinsey consultant, and I know how much she makes, and good Lord.
Well, we don't have them on the line to defend themselves and to come with their arguments, but we're opening the door, inviting you in to discuss this. Maybe also, in addition to the research part, we need a science communication hub, right? That, as you said, Alden, links researchers who have expertise in a range of things with the people who are communicating, and that there's education between those two things. We spent a number of years trying to get education for journalists, which I believe the Global Fashion Agenda took and ran with and worked with Condé Nast to educate at least their audiences. And so that's done, but it's not clear to me how science-based that kind of education is.
You're talking about the vocabulary sheet that they released earlier this year.
Well, that was a step in a direction. I don't know if where is it the London College of Fashion worked with them to develop at least some standard language about this, so to educate people in fashion. So that's a step forward. But also, I believe they've done some master classes with journalists. And again, a lot of the people who I saw there were more people from the industry, sustainability people in the industry, not necessarily scientists, although maybe Linda Greer was part of that. So there is an awareness that we need to educate fashion journalists and communicators in this industry, but maybe we're not doing it as robust as it needs to be.
Yeah, and I've just gotten so fed up. I mean, they're not happening anymore, but I was getting really fed up with being invited to panels where they would be like, and now let's ask an influencer how she thinks we can reform the industry. And I would be like, why am I here?
Oh, I'm glad we gave you a chance to express your grief today. What's going on?
It's been very cathartic.
It's been good. I feel it also. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time. Those of you listening can reach out to us at Big Closets at sustainablefashionacademy.org if you have comments or questions, and for these two as well. And we will continue this theme, fact or fiction. I want to thank Stockholm Fashion Week for enabling us to do this. I hope a lot of you who are part of that will reach out and comment and give suggestions. So thanks both again. Enjoy your day in the hills of Virginia, Alden.
In North Carolina.
Oh, Carolina. My brother lives in Virginia. I got stuck there. And Sandra, we will see each other soon when we travel back and forth from Gothenburg to Stockholm. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Thank you both.